Robsgate gets worse. It looks like some 5080s are affected as well. We've got lots of other news topics to talk about today, including 50 series leaks, AMD 9070 series leaks, all sorts of things. But anyway, let's start with this. So this is in the context of the missing ROPs on the 5090 and 5070 Ti that was indeed confirmed by Nvidia. However, they did not mention any 5080s in this official statement. But we do now have a Redditor showing GPU-Z screenshots of 8 missing ROPs on their 5080, and that's the same issue that we've seen on these other products. If you want to check your own, you download Tech PowerUp's GPU-Z utility from Tech PowerUp's website directly. It should have 112 ROPs. If you are missing 8 of those, you would report 104, and that means you have this problem. It's the same way you identify the issue on the 5070 Ti or 5090. Again, these are what they should have. If you have 8 less, you have this problem. Again, Nvidia did officially confirm the issue on the 5090 and 5070 Ti, but this is now showing up on at least one 5080. So how much farther does this go? Remember, Nvidia claimed the issue was affecting 0.5% of 5090s and 5070 Ti's. That would be 1 out of every 200. And they claimed the average graphical performance impact is 4% with no impact to AI and compute workloads. However, we now have some independent testing of a 5070 Ti with the missing ROPs, showing an up to 11% lower performance in synthetic tests. Now, up to 11% isn't an average, meaning Nvidia could very well be correct that the average result is 4%. However, that doesn't mean individual things couldn't show a larger impact. Specifically, I think it's also likely that they are averaging the 5090 results with the 5070 Ti results. And the thing is, if you are missing 8 out of 176 ROPs, that's a different percentage of your total ROPs than if you're missing 8 out of 96, which is the 5070 Ti situation. Again, 5080 would be missing 8 out of 112. In other words, the less ROPs you have, when you subtract 8 of them, you have lost a larger percentage of the total, and the overall performance impact could be larger. All of that is incredibly frustrating when the suggested solution is to contact your board manufacturer. So like if you have an Asus product, contact Asus. If you have MSI, contact MSI, Gigabyte, etc. But the issue is, do they have any supply to give you a replacement in a timely manner? Because you might be out of your GPU for who knows how long, given current supply shortages, and if they just offer you a refund, you can't currently buy these cards at their MSRP. So if you were lucky enough to get one, now you're maybe out of luck, and as I mentioned in my last video about this, I think I'm going to be suspicious of third-party market cards because I wonder how many people with this issue are going to resort to selling theirs on the third-party market to unload it, get the inflated price back for it, and then just go out and maybe buy a replacement or maybe not if they ended up regretting the purchase or whatever. But I would be suspicious of the third-party market. I think this was a big thing that happened when we were having the Intel CPU issues where people with the faulty 13th, 14th gen chips that had degraded, I was a little scared of the third-party market on those. Anyway, so that's the update on that, and I really, I wish Nvidia would do something a little more than this, because there's also something I can't say is, I could confirm an issue, but I've seen a lot of people suspicious about this, and it is rather suspicious how fast Nvidia not only responded with an official statement on this, but with specific percentage numbers and exactly which models were affected. And this was back when people had, to my knowledge, only reported the issue on 5090s. And then we did get people confirming the issue on 5070 Ti's, but to my knowledge, that was after the Nvidia statement on the 5090s. Now, maybe people had contacted them, they were aware internally, but the point is, when were they aware of this? Because again, they had the stats on this pretty quick. So were they aware of this and shipped anyway? And it's like a cost-benefit analysis of, well, let's ship some defective products, and the cost of the amount of people who will actually bother to go through an RMA process is not going to be as expensive as if we just like lost this shipment or something like that. I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but I don't like that math on that because it also damages the reputation of Nvidia with their quality assurance and how they take care of customers. So I really don't like this. It would be nice if they're aware of what batch of cards had the issue, if there is any way we could get serial numbers and issue an actual like recall statement where users are contacted and given the option of replacing it rather than having to be somebody who happens to monitor sites that report on this kind of thing or watch videos like mine, because a lot of people just buy their graphics card and tune out of the tech hardware space because they already made their purchasing decision. Anyway, I don't like this. Now, let's move on to some other topics. How about 5070 leaks? That's the next 50 series GPU. We're expecting reviews out in a couple of weeks. But that doesn't mean that as soon as reviewers have results, they don't accidentally run a synthetic benchmark with the upload to the online database button checked. Because we have a 5070 result showing up in Blender. So Blender benchmark for the RTX 5070 puts it just barely ahead of the 4070 Super. Do keep in mind that this is a single result for the 5070 versus an average result for 4070 Supers running on various systems. So this is not the same as like a careful independent third-party review running both cards on exactly the same setup. That being said, if you divide these to get the average uplift, it's only 1.7% faster than a 4070 Super. That's not a massive upgrade. However, the 4070 Super was a $600 MSRP and the 5070 has a $550 MSRP, so at least there's that. But we've all seen how much MSRP is meaning, at least at launch. Hopefully in a few months things are way better, but yeah. Anyway, what if we compare it against the non-Super 4070, which did eventually have its MSRP reduced to $550? Well, if we average that comparison point, 4070s averaging this, we then get a 21% generational uplift. So basically, 5070 versus 4070 looks like about a 20.5, 20.6% generational uplift, but versus the 4070 Super, which has been available at a similar pricing for a year now, less than 2% uplift. Now, this is actually very similar to what Nvidia has officially claimed ever since the announcement. This performance graph, when you ignore the multi-frame gen versus not multi-frame gen, I would say misleading bar graphs, and look at the apples to apples comparisons, 5070 versus 4070, this is, if you pixel count it, about a 20% performance uplift. So they're claiming on their official claims about a 20% uplift, and our leaked open data on Blender is also showing about a 20% generational uplift. We have another leak corroborating similar numbers. This is, I found reported at Tom's Hardware. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description. Is showing that the RTX 5070 benchmarks show mixed results against a 4070 Super, 18% slower than a 5070 Ti, still around 20% faster than the base 4070. And this is not just reporting on the same Blender thing I just showed you. This is a Geekbench result showing OpenCL and Vulkan scores. So basically, all of these leaks so far are just corroborating NVIDIA's claims, and these claims for other cards like the 5070 Ti, 5090, 5080 have all been within a couple percent of the general third-party review consensus. So this gives you a pretty good idea of what to expect. Again, if you look at that relative to the 4070 and 4070 Super, if we take the 4070 at Tech PowerUp's relative performance chart and go up about 20%, well, where does that put you? It puts you within the ballpark of like a 3080 Ti, a 3090, a little bit slower than a 4070 Ti. It puts you a little bit ahead of a 4070 Super, which is about 16% faster than a 4070. So in general, it's looking like, at least in rasterized performance, or even just when you're not comparing multi-frame gen versus non-multi-frame gen, it's looking like the 5070 is likely to actually be slower than a 4070 Ti. So the new 50 Series 70 class might not beat the 4070 Ti version. Just to put that in context, it'll be close. And again, it's looking to be only a couple percent faster than the 4070 Super. That's a bit rough, but that is where we're looking at. And again, it is in line with NVIDIA's performance claim here. If the MSRP actually sticks at $550, that's at least maybe still somewhat interesting in the current market, but we'll also have to see what AMD does, because we're expecting the 90 series to be somewhat competitive with the 5070 and 5070 Ti, at least from a naming standpoint, so probably also a pricing standpoint, we'll have to see. Now, in other NVIDIA news, their Nvidia App has received an update. The main update seems to be a DLSS Override new model update. So in the newer Nvidia app, you can now, on any RTX GPU, override older versions of DLSS with newer versions, similar to what you can do with like DLSS Swapper as a third-party tool, but this is an Nvidia official version in their Nvidia app, although it has to be in whitelisted games, so you can't do this in every game, just the games that they have confirmed it works well and give you that option. Anyway, there's a new DLSS model here. The interesting thing is this might mean that as soon as there's new DLSS models available, they've been trained and they're ready to go, but maybe haven't made it into any actual games yet, NVIDIA can release those through this NVIDIA app, which is kind of interesting. So that's a cool feature. Now, speaking of driver level features, how about we jump into some AMD news? It's claimed by videocards.com, although this is very much in the leak side of things, so you have to take that for how much do you trust this source. I'll give my thoughts on that in a second. The claim is that AMD is preparing Fluid Motion Frames version 2.1. We already have a 2.0 version, and they are claiming that this will support not just the 90 series cards, it will support the 6000 and 7000 series as well. So basically, if you were using AFMF 2.0, 2.1 should work as well. Now, remember AFMF, at least if you're not familiar with this is driver level frame generation. So similar to what like lossless scaling does, except it's done through AMD's driver software and it uses its own algorithm. So, different, it's not the same thing, but that's the idea. You're applying frame generation to games that don't have any frame generation built into them, which has its trade-offs in the image quality. The claim here is that this will deliver better image quality for the generated frames. Now, the source for this is video cards themselves. They are making this claim saying that this has been presented to media, and this is coming immediately after their leaked benchmarks for the 9000 series. I reported on these, was that yesterday? I lose track of time. Anyway. So AMD, sorry, I can't speak. Videocards.com claimed to have AMD's press release that had been given to press, but was still under embargo and claimed to have access to it. That's where they're making the performance claims, and that is also where they're claiming that this information about AFMF 2.1 is coming from. So, if you trusted these performance claims, you would probably also trust them on this. And generally, when videocards.com has cited their own internal sources, I would say their track record has been good. Remember that videocards.com also publishes, because I was seeing people's reaction to whether they trust these performance numbers for the 9000 series, saying that, well, videocards.com posts all sorts of nonsense from a variety of quality of sources. But remember, there's a big difference between when videocards.com is reporting on, here's a tweet that happened, make of it what you will, and when they're claiming that they have sourced this document themselves. So a lot more of their own reputation is on the line when they say they have sourced it themselves, rather than just reporting on a tweet somebody made somewhere and just saying, make of that tweet what you will, right? Anyway, so do keep that in mind when you're evaluating that source. Also, videocards.com is reporting that a 9070 XT gaming OC version has been reported boosting up to 3.24 gigahertz, apparently on a Linux benchmark. Now, they're actually gathering this information from Tomasz Goransky on Twitter, where it's showing this these stats. Now, why would they be doing this on Linux? Well, Linux got an updated RDNA 4 driver before those are publicly available. Now, I haven't tested this out myself, but theoretically, there are a lot of 9070 and 9070 XT graphics cards out in the wilds. They have been on store shelves, although not technically available for sale, since like mid-January at least. So if you had one of those and could load it up on Linux, and Linux kernel had been updated with some RDNA 4 support, theoretically you could test some things out. Anyway, he's saying it drawing 329 watts at that, which is above the leaked figures for, I think, 304 watts as being official, but if this is a gaming OC version, a lot of times those have increased power limits. Anyway, 3.24 gigahertz, definitely some big numbers, so hopefully that means big performance. Now, in other news, we are seeing Some issues going on with AMD as well. Apparently, there have been widespread failures of 9800X3D gaming CPUs, but apparently it's most common on Asrock motherboards. So this then begs the question, is this an issue with the 9800X3D, or is this an issue with something that's going on with Asrock motherboards specifically, or are there two different problems happening? I found this at WCCF Tech, but they are referencing a Reddit thread, which is an aggregate of, on the Asrock forums, just trying to create a mega thread because these issues are becoming so common. Although apparently, if you read through this, the exact behavior can be very different. So some are CPU deaths where they just seem DOA, some die within hours, days, or weeks, some deaths seem to be during active use, while others occur in attempted post or boot. There's some reports of being able to revive it with a BIOS flashback, but other people not having that being a solution that actually works for them. So I don't know what exactly to make of this because I have a 9800X3D, but I'm not experiencing this issue. So I can't really give any personal, data on what's going on here. If this does become a wider spread issue, hopefully maybe somebody like Gamers Nexus with more access to more resources and time and whatnot, could do something with this. Maybe Asrock or AMD or somebody could give an official statement. So anyway, that's where we're at with this. Just be aware that this is apparently an issue. That's not great. Hopefully this doesn't turn into a massive problem. Like I said, apparently now it is more limited, but is getting big enough that they're starting to post a mega thread at Asrock subreddit to start to gather all of these reports. Now, on the X3D chip side of things, though, there is a leaked benchmark showing the 9950 X3D equivalent to performance with the 9950X. However, because this is synthetic benchmarking, this isn't the kind of thing where the 3D V-cache tends to pay off. In other words, it's gaming workloads where the 3D V-cache parts tend to really shine. And if you're doing more of just synthetic CPU stress tests, it's generally not going to take advantage of the 3D V-cache in those types of scenarios, in which case it would be completely expected for the 9950X3D to match the performance of a 9950X. So, kind of interesting that we got a leaked benchmark, but it doesn't really tell us anything that we wouldn't have already expected just by the name of the product. So there you go. Now, I know many of you have been interested in Monster Hunter Wilds PC performance. Looks like the review embargo has lifted. However, I don't get review code for games ahead of time. I'm not really a game review channel. So maybe that's something I could look into in the future. I don't know. But with that being said, some of the reviewers who used a PC to review it did comment on performance, although I couldn't find as many comments on this as I would like with any real specifics. Some of the most specific information I could get actually comes from the WCCF Tech review, where it sounds a bit rough to me. Now, they're gaming on an i7-13700F and RTX 4080 with 32 gigabytes of system RAM. That is an extremely high-end and expensive system. That being said, they are trying to run it at 4K, although they're using DLSS quality, which reduces the internal rendering resolution to 1440p, although there's a little bit of performance cost to the upscale, so it would perform a little bit better at a native 1440p. They're also using frame generation, and that's extremely important. They're also not completely locked to ultra settings. They're using a mix of high and ultra settings. And with that in mind, I would say that running at an average of 86 FPS with 45 FPS 1% lows actually sounds awful because that's with frame generation enabled. So now this is during a early game, guys, I'm not a Monster Hunter player. I don't know how to pronounce this. A Jarakan hunt set in the Oil Well Basin map, saying there's a lot of fancy fire effects going off, etc. In other words, the built-in benchmark tool that we got ahead of time didn't really have actual monster battles. And so it was hard to make of how accurate that would represent things, and the open beta was an old version of the game. You would hope the launch version is more optimized. Well, in actual battle, with a lot of effects happening, averaging 86 FPS with 45 FPS 1% lows with frame generation enabled at not even complete ultra settings on a 4080 sounds a bit rough to me. Again, if that was at native 4K, okay, fine, but that's with DLSS quality enabled. 86 FPS with frame generation is really rendering at about 43 FPS, although frame generation itself has some overhead. So if you turn frame gen off, it would probably be higher than 43 FPS. I would guess closer to, upper 40s or even 50. But again, that does not sound great. And that's 45 FPS 1% lows with frame generation. Anyway, he says in the heat of the battle, he didn't notice the FPS drops too much, but when looking back at it afterwards, didn't feel too great about that. Now, Digital Foundry has a console performance analysis, which isn't PC, but might give some idea of the type of optimization. On consoles, the game runs with a frame rate mode, balance mode, and resolution mode that's effectively a 60 FPS mode, a 40 FPS mode, and a 30 FPS mode. The report is that the frame rate mode, to try to hit 60 FPS, runs more like 900p most of the time, but does go as low as 720p, and does still have dips below 60 FPS, and is using FSR1 upscaling to try to achieve the upscale, probably for performance reasons, because otherwise you wouldn't use FSR1 as your upscaler. And again, look at the blurry mess of pixels that you get on that. I'm sure this is zoomed in a bit, but wow, that looks rough. When comparing that with the 40 FPS mode and 30 FPS mode, where things look noticeably sharper, but again, the frame rate is also a lot lower. Whereas the pixel counts on these were actually generally well above 1080p even in the balance mode, and I think it was something like 1620p in the resolution mode. Given that the 60 FPS mode runs this low of an internal resolution and then is using an FSR1 based upscaler, that's not a great sign. I would say performance-wise, especially given what you're seeing on screen. Like, it can look okay, but anyway, that's where we're at with that. Last thing I'll leave you guys with today is we did get PC system requirements for Lost Soul Aside. I would love to do a dedicated video on this. However, they have not given any resolution or frame rate targets along with these settings, which means there's not a whole heck of a lot I can say. The minimums are a GTX 1060 or an RX 5500 XT. The CPUs are a bit higher than what I would say would go with those generally, being an Core i5-10400 or Ryzen 5 3600, so more in line with maybe console level CPUs. And they are asking for an SSD and 16 gigabytes of system RAM. Now, what does that minimum get you? Is that 30 FPS at 540p? I don't know. Maybe it's 1080p 60. I don't know. It doesn't tell us. Recommended is a RTX 2060 or an RX 5700 XT on the same CPUs. Is that 60 FPS at 1080p medium? Is it 30 FPS at 1080p medium? Is it 60 FPS at 1440p medium with upscaling? I have absolutely no idea because they don't tell us. High settings are RTX 3070 or RX 6800 XT, and they did bump up the CPUs a bit. Are they bumping that up to because the graphic settings need it, or are they bumping that up because we're going from 30 FPS to 60 FPS? I have no idea. It doesn't tell us. They do give even higher configurations for ray tracing on, high settings with ray tracing on, or ultra settings with ray tracing on, where now we're going up to a 4080 Super or 7900 XT if you want high settings with ray tracing on, and ultra with ray tracing on, a 5070 Ti, which would be closer to like a, that would be pretty similar to the 4080/4080 Super, kind of in that ballpark if you want a earlier generation equivalent. Anyway, so that's that. All right, that's the news I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed it, found it useful and or interesting, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.